Welcome to the KUBIK Report. Today I am pleased to share my 18th podcast with Vic Kubik, and I'm happy once again to have him joining us on the KUBIK Report. Greg, as you know, is a business leader, author, and keynote speaker, and a personal life coach that I have known for nearly 2 decades. His clients range from large Fortune 100 corporations down to small, family-owned businesses, and many individual clients seeking personal leadership development. His website is LeadershipExcellenceNow.com. As a reminder, you can learn more about Greg's training skills on his YouTube site. Simply type in Leadership Excellence Channel on a YouTube homepage search bar, and you'll find him. So, Greg, welcome back to the KUBIK Report.
Well, thank you, Vic. I appreciate the invitation to come back and see you. It's a beautiful, inspiring spring day here in Northern Ohio. It's a great day to be alive.
Well, it's been a great day here in the Indianapolis area. You know, you talk about where you are. People said, well, where is he? He talks about Litchfield, but that's the Cleveland area.
So. Yes, it's actually in Medina County. It's a little bit southwest of Greater Cleveland. That's correct.
Well, the weather here has been beautiful. It was over 80 degrees here yesterday.
Ah, nice.
Now, in the past, we have spoken with Greg about a lot of interesting topics, including personal leadership development, business leadership, servant leadership, how to have a fulfilling and productive day, and common misconceptions about the law of attraction, and also communication and avoiding conversational terrorism. You can find all of these past episodes on the KUBIK Report. And I might say that I have a playlist that includes all of them, and I'll include that playlist in the show notes here where you can see all the podcasts with Greg in one listing. Recently, Greg and I posted a couple of podcasts on the topic of emotional intelligence. It has generated a lot of positive comments. Greg's YouTube site posted the latest podcast, and it has over 10,000 views. Congratulations, Greg.
Thank you.
Today, we have decided to continue our third discussion on this topic.
Well, thank you, Vic. Today, I hope to be able to talk about the 10 signs of emotional intelligence in action, things that we can experience that either relate to us or that we can sense in other people that are really good examples of emotional intelligence.
Now, Greg, some listeners may be joining us today who did not hear parts 1 and 2. Can you give us a very brief description and recap of what emotional intelligence is?
Absolutely, and I'll try to do it quickly so we don't become too redundant, but I would encourage your podcast listeners to go back and hear the other two. Obviously, these are like puzzle pieces, and if you hear the other two, this particular podcast will make a little more sense to you. So emotional intelligence, which is called EI, also called emotional quotient or EQ, is the ability to master your emotions, to use your emotions effectively, to manage them, to handle your own emotions. And the second part of emotional intelligence is the ability to read other people's emotions, to perceive how they're feeling, what they're telegraphing to you. You become aware of other people's emotions and make the effort to understand their genuine concerns. And of course, this includes the ability to de-escalate tension whenever that is possible. It all started, the idea started many years ago by the concept of emotional strength, and it was introduced by Abraham Maslow, who was an American psychologist in the 1950s. He was the author of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. By the way, Vic, just something interesting that maybe we can talk about in the future. Maslow actually had an additional hierarchy above self-actualization that was never published. And so maybe that'd be a good idea for a future podcast to discuss his unpublished additional hierarchy of needs. Anyway, Abraham Maslow gets the credit for it, using that term emotional strength. Other authors joined in, but the term EI or EQ became widely known with the publication of Daniel Goleman's book. It was published in 1995, entitled Emotional Intelligence, Why It Can Matter More than IQ. And Goldman followed up with several similar publications to reinforce the term. So then began a group of numerous studies that kind of caught fire. And that has occurred over the past 20 plus years by various psychologists and researchers. And they've come to the conclusion that higher EI is associated with higher leadership effectiveness regarding the achievement of organizational goals. And then other studies have found that EI connects positively with a number of tasks, and these include performance in leading teams. Another connection is strong and positive one-on-one relationships with coworkers. And finally, the ability to manage your own stress, because we all experience various degrees of stress. And when you have EI, you learn to manage your stress. Research also shows that emotional intelligence can be developed and strengthened over a period of time. That was the focus of our last podcast.
Mhm,
Again, I
mhm.
encourage any of your listeners to go ahead and catch it in case they missed part two. And this is in contrast to IQ, which is relatively steady over a lifetime. So while IQ is important, EI is increasingly recognized as a critical factor in both your personal and your professional success. And that's why this whole topic is so important.
Yes, and I had one person write to me after your podcast saying that at his job, in his career,
Hmm.
or at the job that he got, he was required to read a book about emotional intelligence. Also, in the first or second podcast, you had a couple of different tests you could take. Well, my wife and I
Hmm.
took them, the free tests. In fact, we'll
Yes.
include the links to them.
And
I'll
how'd you
show those
do?
here. I did what I thought I was.
Sure, sure.
I had
Okay.
I had empathy, but maybe not all is organized.
All
So,
right.
so I was happy about that. I was happy about
Sure.
that, and
Sure.
my wife said it hit her real well too. So go ahead and take that test because you'll be probably surprised pleasantly that you're better than you think you were.
Good. Yeah, that's those are encouraging words, and I would encourage anyone of your listeners to go ahead and take that test. I think it'll reveal some things to you about yourself maybe you weren't fully aware of or fully appreciative of.
Mhm. What are some of the signs or situations when either we are demonstrating high emotional intelligence or someone else's?
Great question. As usual, Vic, you come up with a lot of interesting questions on these podcasts, and I would like to cover today 10 signs of emotional intelligence in action. And these signs can be something that we're demonstrating, or maybe as we're growing in emotional intelligence, we sense or see in others and we say, hey, that's really a good example. That's something I need to emulate. So, the very first of the 10 signs is you stay calm when you're stressed. Here's an example. During a tense situation, it might be a meeting, it might be a one on one conversation with someone. You take a deep breath and you exhale slowly. You sense that you're being stressed and you catch that and you force yourself to remain calm. And if you feel like you're getting to the edge, you're going to say something you regret, then what you do is you ask for a brief pause. Maybe you say, let's take a 5 minute potty break, or
Mhm.
I need to go to the restroom. And you go in there and you process a little bit, you calm down, you take a few deep breaths, and you come back and continue the conversation. But you learn to stay calm when you are stressed rather than just lashing out, rather than just saying things that are going to hurt people or that you're going to regret after they come out of your mouth.
That type of thing is learned through experience. Is that if you do it a
Hmm.
few times and either lash out, lose your job, or lash out and lose a friendship, you learn that you just don't do that type of thing. Just count to 5 or count to 10, whatever, before speaking, and you'll find that in later on you'll be glad that you did because you felt that way at that very moment and you felt like saying those things and you really meant them and you probably had good reason to say those
Hmm.
things, but that was not
Right.
the thing to do. And emotional intelligence is a person who can control what he says.
Yeah, absolutely. And the second thing which ties into that is you don't take things personally. And that's really hard for a lot of us. I'll give you an example. Maybe you're talking to a coworker or you're in a meeting and they snap at you. And what you do if you have emotional intelligence is you say maybe they're having a bad day instead of feeling hurt. Maybe they just are going through a stressful situation themselves and they have a short fuse. So rather than taking it personally, which if you do, then that will engender bitterness or constant anger towards that person, then you're building a wall and you're destroying the relationship with your team or that person. You just learn not to take things personally. You allow it, like the old phrase, water off a duck's back, rather than brooding and rather than allowing that emotion to get out of control and becoming angry and bitter at others. So, again, the second one is you don't take things personally. And of course, you learn that the truth is that if something doesn't matter 5 years from now, then don't dwell on it today.
Mhm.
If that means that it's small and unimportant. There was a book out a number of years ago about not sweating the small stuff.
Mhm.
And you learn not to take those kinds of things personally. And when they're said, you handle it maturely, and you don't brood on it, and you don't make more of it than was intended by the comment.
Sometimes a person who is very empathetic is a person with greater sensitivity. And that can work against them because they tend to
Hmm.
get offended more easily than a person who has less empathy, which is not good towards the others, but he protects
Yes.
himself better. So those are all things to kind of grow into and just be aware of.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And of course, tied in with this point number two about not taking things personally is just having a healthy dose of humility. If you don't feel like you're superior, if you don't feel like you're better than everyone else, then you can much easier deal with an unkind remark about you than if your ego is out of control, or if your feelings, you're wearing your feelings on your shirt sleeve, as they say. So it's a very important principle, a very important point, because taking things personally has ruined more relationships. It's ruined more team efforts to get things done than probably any other reason.
And it's really difficult, especially if you climb in the leadership chain, to be that way because people come to you, people not adore you, but they say all these things about you, and then when something not that way comes your way, you get confused. So that is I feel is one of the most important things about leadership is to
Hmm.
really maintain humility. Just have it very much front and center of your mind.
Then we come to the third sign, and that is that you own your emotions. And I'll give you an example of that. Let's say, again, you're in a meeting or you're having a conversation with someone, could be your spouse, could be a coworker, and after snapping at someone, what you do is you immediately apologize quickly and you own that you acted out when you were heated and upset. Rather than making mistakes, rather than blaming the other person, well, I wouldn't have done this if you hadn't said, or if you would have agreed with me sooner, I wouldn't have snapped at you. No, you don't do that. You apologize quickly. You realize that what you said was improper, was not the right thing to do, was not a good example. So you quickly apologize and you own up to the fact that you snapped and you shouldn't have. Now, this is very difficult for people who are autocratic because they think because they have some title, like the Grand Poobah, that
Mm-hmm.
they are entitled to snap at people. That they have a right to snap at people, and they don't apologize for anything. So that's a real issue and that's a real problem. And that's, again, an indication of someone who lacks emotional intelligence, who's prone to do that. So, again, point number three is you own your own emotions.
I think in our culture, in our Western culture, we're more prone to understand that or practice it because they see the bad effects. I had worked
Hmm.
with cultures in the USSR and in
Hmm.
autocratic countries, and I had found that people there had a hierarchy, not Maslow's hierarchy, but a hierarchy of power. And they
Yeah,
absolutely ripped apart people below them and they cowered to the people above them. And that was just part of the culture. That
hmm,
was just
hmm.
expected. They didn't apologize to anybody, and then they fawned all over the people above them. Gave them gifts and did all kinds of things of that sort.
Sure.
We even had trouble with ministry in some of those cultures that have those uh, tendencies. where it was
Mm-hmm.
part of their culture. And then when we had somebody who needs to function in a pastoral way, having a hard time to adjust to some of those principles.
Yeah, I mean, that was a regular part of American culture, frankly, business culture in the 50s and 60s. And it only began to change in the 70s as we had some cultural shifts and people just would not put up with it any longer. And particularly very talented people could go and do something else. So they were not going to endure someone constantly snapping and barking at
Mm-hmm.
them to get something done because they were too talented to have to deal with that kind of nonsense. So our own culture began to shift in the 70s to the point where we are today, where a lot of major decisions are a little bit more team oriented and where the leader is a lot more understanding, a better listener, and more apt to take in other people's opinions and ideas before he or she makes a decision.
Right. And they may get by with it for a while, but you'll give them a few mulligans.
Hmm.
If they're persistent that way and don't take warnings and don't listen, then it's time for action.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, people just won't put up with it today. They don't feel there's a need to. As an employer, you're buying someone's skills and services, and there are just too many ways for that person to have a beautiful, fulfilling career than to deal with that kind of treatment.
Mm-hmm.
And that leads us to number four, is that you recognize your triggers. Now, this is a strong need for personal maturity, but give you an example, you realize when you're getting irritated and you sense that and you ask yourself, wow, I'm being irritated here. I need to tread lightly. For example, so maybe you're irritated because other people are interrupting you and you calmly address it rather than snapping at them, rather than being angry. You say something like, I would appreciate it if you would hear me out, and then I'd be more than happy to hear you out and hear what you have to say. But please let me or allow me to finish my thought. So you sense and realize when you're getting irritated, you deal with it calmly in a meeting or again in a one on one conversation. You don't allow that irritation to erupt into exploding or saying something again that you're going to regret. And it takes a high level of personal maturity for a person to say to themselves, I can sense my blood pressure rising. I can sense the anxiety level increasing in me. And now, how am I going to choose to respond to this situation rather than just getting snappy or putting on a tirade or doing something that's going to disrupt the group or the conversation? So, again, number four is you recognize your own triggers.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now number five.
Number five, you know what's within your control. And this gets back to the statement I made a little earlier. If an event happens and you know 5 years from now that you're not even going to care and probably won't remember it, then why are you getting so upset now? Here's a classic example. I witnessed this a lot of times when I was in the corporate world. Let's say that you're flying a lot and your flight is canceled. Well, if you have high emotional intelligence, you calmly rebook and you make alternative plans, including where you may have to sleep that night if there's no other flights out. You do that calmly. Why? It's because it's not within your control. It's totally outside of your control. There's probably nothing you can do about it. You may be able to catch another flight and take a few extra legs so that you can eventually get home, but it's something that's out of your control. And I can tell you, as a businessman, how many times I would see a business person or a family just totally lose control at the ticket counter and take it out on the poor employee there who was just trying to deal with a situation that was totally outside of their control, and people were shooting the manager and they would shout and they'd put on a scene, and that was nothing wrong with what the person at the ticket counter had done. They're a victim of circumstances just like we are. So you learn to know what's within your control, where your choices are, what you can change and how you can change it. And also to coordinate with that, you know what's not within your control and you just let it go. And you deal with a negative situation calmly and you don't lose your cool, you don't publicly make a fool out of yourself.
Well, we had our last move from
Hmm.
Cincinnati here to
Yeah.
Indianapolis had everything go wrong. Everything. In fact, we would say, "What what's going to go wrong with this, and that?" And certainly, we were expecting something to go wrong, and it would happen to be wrong. I mean, everything from moving the piano, even to coordinating between two different groups that were doing it. First of all, we made a wrong choice of the firm that did this. We
Hmm.
wanted to do it on the cheaper, and so it was. But then we got this. We got to actually start to laughing about it.
Yeah, well, sure. There you go. There you go.
That kind of helped us to, okay, what's going to go wrong what's going
Yeah,
to go
oh,
wrong this
sure.
hour,
Relieves
and
the tension. Absolutely.
sure
Yeah.
enough, it'll go wrong, and then we got to fix it. But yesterday, my wife and I were talking about that, and it's been
Hmm.
2 years ago. It's gone in the past, and it's just a life experience that we can chalk up. And I'm thankful that we didn't take it out on the movers, because they really worked hard, and they had to come in the middle of the night. And there's all kinds of things that weren't the way that was to be planned, but you got to get experience that way. And then afterward, you say, I'm glad we stayed that way.
Well, humor is a great way to alleviate the tension of a situation. And you set a good example there, Vic, by you and your wife kidding each other and talking about what could possibly go wrong next. Someone told me once that the only law lacking in Murphy's Law is that Murphy was an optimist, because things can go wrong a lot more than Murphy ever anticipated in our lives.
Uh-huh.
Well, that leads us to sign number 6. Again, we're talking about the 10 signs of emotional intelligence in action, and that is that you learn from your setbacks, because we all have setbacks. And I'll give you an example. Let's say that you have a business presentation. You have what you believe is the greatest idea that's going to transform the organization, take it to another level. So you give it your best, it's your best pitch, and you have PowerPoint and you have facts and statistics, and it's soundly rejected. That happens
Mm.
every day in a lot of organizations. Well, when you have high emotional intelligence, you don't stew over that. You don't allow that burr under your saddle to become an irritation. You don't allow it to create bitterness towards others who rejected your idea. But instead, you analyze the feedback. You say, why? Well, what are the weaknesses of this idea? And you listen and you analyze that feedback and you improve it. So 6 months later, situations may change. Maybe the organization's a little more desperate, and now you can give that feedback, that pitch, all over again. And now you can address those rejected ideas because you improved it and you're ready to do it all over again. So, again, number 6 is you learn from those setbacks in life rather than just becoming angry and calling people names because they didn't think your idea was a great one, or becoming resentful, but you allow it to be a learning experience.
Well, and part of it too could be that you didn't read your audience. They may have been
Hmm.
against your idea for one reason or another, and you just try to just, I'll show them with facts, and try to shove
Hmm.
it down their throat. And that oftentimes people will reject even facts if the relationship is
Right.
not good. So
Sure.
just make sure that you read the audience. In a sense, talk to some of the staff members beforehand, and maybe even talk to the person who's probably most against it and say, here's what I'd like to
Hmm.
do and here's why, so that in the meeting he doesn't just get his own group together and sabotage what you're doing.
Sure. And what you actually do, if you're very savvy, as you see, is before the meeting, you send your ideas to the couple of people that you believe are going to be totally against it.
Mm-hmm.
And you ask them, what do you think? And then you take the information that they provide you and you mix that into your coming presentation so you can address those issues in your presentation rather than being caught blindsided at the end of it when you ask for comments or ideas. So that's
Absolutely.
one of the things you learn to do as you get savvy with these kinds of situations. So again, number 6, to highlight, you learn from setbacks in life. Number 7 is you sense others' emotions, and this is so important. I've been amazed throughout my career how insensitive people are to what other people are going through. For example, let's say that you're working with someone and you notice that they're quieter than they usually are. And you say to them privately, "Hey, is everything okay? Is there anything I can help you with today?" You show a concern for them. I say, "Yeah, I'm just feeling a little under the weather. I got some bad news. My son was stopped last night for drunk driving," or you have no idea what's going on in their life, but you're sensitive to the fact that they're quieter than they usually are. And you again, you do this privately, and you do it in the essence of really wanting to help. Is everything okay? Is there anything I can do to help you at this time? And if they shut down, if they say no, then you say, well, if you get to the point where you'd like to talk about anything, I always have an open mind and an open heart, so feel free to talk to me. But you become very sensitive to other people's emotions. It has always amazed me just how arrogant and how insensitive some people are. They're clueless as to what the other person is going through because genuinely they just don't care.
Mm-hmm.
So again, number 7, you sense others' emotions.
Mm-hmm. And number 8?
Number 8 is you support others without judgment. And I'll give you an example. So when someone you're working with shares a mistake that they made, instead of overreacting, instead of screaming at them, instead of becoming upset, you say, "Well, did you learn from what did you learn from this mistake?" I see. And is it something that you feel that you'll repeat in the future, or did you get the lesson here? Wonderful. And then you say, "Everyone messes up. How can I help you to fix it?" So instead of chalking that down, well, I'm out to get this person. So here's mistake number 7 this year. What you do is you support that person without condemning them, without harsh judgment. If we all make mistakes, we are all human. And if people are learning from their mistakes, that's exactly what we want. We want them to learn. And we also want them to come and openly share with us a mistake they make. If you don't have that kind of healthy environment, then what people are going to do is they're going to hide their mistakes. And then by the time that mistake bubbles to the surface, it's 10 times harder now to fix the problem than if you had an open, healthy culture and people could just come to you and say, "Hey, you know what? I screwed up. I
Mm-hmm.
made a mistake, and here's what it is." And then you deal with it in a way that promotes high emotional intelligence. So, again, number 8 is you support without judgment.
Mm-hmm. I find too that with working with people, that when you have a good relationship with them, but it's an
Hmm.
ongoing good relationship, that if a mistake is made, and it's honestly a mistake of either negligence or whatever, it's forgiven easily. But if the relationship is bad already,
Hmm.
that'll be held against them. They can't do anything right, and they'll probably continue making, become accident
Sure.
prone.
Right.
But I have found that with employees that is a truism.
Hmm. Yep. Absolutely. Good point, Victor. Thank you for that. And number 9 is you know when others need space. And again, you can only do this if you're reading others, if you have a deep sense of empathy, if you developed a relationship with others. Let's say, here's an example, a family member, again, a coworker, seems to be upset. And visibly, you can see that through their body language. Maybe their herky-jerky emotions, their eyes show that they're a little bit angry or they're frustrated. And it's time to give them some space. They're trying to process something that's bothering them. So instead of pushing them to talk, well, let's hash this out right now. I've been in those kind of situations. You say, "Look, I visibly understand you're upset. I just want you to know that I'm here when you're ready to talk about it."
Mhm.
So you have that sensitivity and you realize that they need some time and space to process their feelings, and you're not going to provoke or push them right now to get them to talk about that situation. That's being sensitive, that's being emotionally mature. Again, number 9, you know when others need space.
That is very true in so many instances, marriage in particular,
Hmm.
and in
Right.
working with close compatriots on a project. It is so very, very important to let that person brood about it or think about it, or maybe it's not even worth bringing up again, because if it's something that he knows that you know, that could just be dropped and handled another way, rather than to have everything be justified on a spreadsheet. This
Yeah,
person,
right.
and so,
Exactly.
and so I think that could be done that way.
Absolutely. Good point again. And then number 10 is you help without tearing others down. And I'll give you an example of this. So someone comes to you with an idea or a project you gave them to do. And instead of saying, well, this is wrong, this isn't your best work, which this is a phrase that I've heard in the past, this isn't your best work. Instead of that, you say, this could be better and it could be improved by doing X. So you don't need to tear someone down when they come to you and something isn't even 50%. You can focus on the positive. Remember the teaching of the 1 minute manager, and you catch them doing something right. So when people don't come to you with their best, when they come to you with something that isn't quite what you're looking for or maybe isn't spot on, instead of tearing them down, criticizing them, or making them feel small, you focus on a part that could be improved by doing something different. And by focusing on that part, that may change, that may have a ripple effect on the whole concept of their project and idea if you focus on the positive and give them some guidance rather than just blankly saying you're wrong, poor job, don't like it. So you help others, you realize that's your calling as a leader, but there's no need to tear people down. I would add on to that, again, most people act this way, including a lot of the signs that we've talked about that don't show high emotional intelligence because they had a poor mentor somewhere in their career. They worked for someone who did not have high emotional intelligence, and maybe they barked at people. They were insensitive, didn't genuinely care about people, didn't care about regulating their emotions, and they got away with it. Maybe they were praised as a great leader at the time. So they think, because that's the example and the model that they saw, they think those are the right kinds of things to do. So it's really an epiphany when you realize the whole personal leadership concept of the fact that we are to be servants when we lead. And that means we are to improve ourselves, to modify our own behavior, to inspire others, and to be sensitive to their needs. And only when we get to that point, to me, it's like a complete revelation when that dawns upon you, and the fact that that's the way that you should guide your marriage, that's the way you should guide your child rearing, that's the way you should guide your career. That only when that happens and the light comes on and you realize that leadership is also being a servant, a steward to the things that you are entrusted, respecting those things and respecting those people and serving them in the greatest way that you can. And all of this ties into getting back to that principle, including emotional intelligence itself.
I find too that the things that you had brought out in all of these 10 points are
Mhm.
people who are going to survive and be looked upon as great leaders or great bosses or great mentors. People will remember them years later. Those who were gruff, those who were rough, those who put people down are going to be either replaced ultimately or
Mhm.
not remembered well.
Yeah, or their organizations are just going to stall out because you're not going to have and surround yourself with the brightest and the best. And again, I have to emphasize in our Western culture today, talented people can make an easy living. And they will not, today's generation will not put up with some imbecile who is embarrassing them, humiliating them, insulting them, snapping at them. There's just too many great jobs, too many great careers that are available, probably for more money than you're making now.
Mm.
So people are just not going to endure that today. And that's something that we need to embrace and understand as a culture. People have options. Talented people can use those talents in hundreds of places and make a very good living and have a very satisfied life. So we have to understand the importance of treating people with dignity and respect.
And I think for the person who is the one who is the leader or looked upon as a leader or boss, whatever, he's a person who needs to watch the things that he says and perhaps analyze things that he says. I know that when I was pastor, one time a woman came to me and she said, "Do you realize by this phrase that you're using, which I happen to use a lot, I didn't mean to use it badly, but that is offensive?" And actually I went back and I really thought about it. I said, I really shouldn't be that way, because I'm talking to people who don't really know fully where I'm coming from. And if I use statements that make them feel put down or in some way disrespected, and you disrespect somebody, that's the beginning of a bad relationship.
Yes, absolutely.
And I found that I cleaned that up, and I felt like it was just very, very good. So a person should be open to correction, so to speak. That is everything I say really good?
Yeah, any great leader has someone on their team who feels comfortable coming to them and saying, "I heard your comment," or "I appreciate your idea, but I think you need to consider this. You didn't say this correctly. You said this in a way that's offensive. Your idea is weak because of X and Y and Z." Every great leader needs someone who loves them enough and is not afraid of them to have the courage to come in and say those things, and any great leader is willing to accept it.
Right. I think that all these points are just excellent. I've just really appreciated our conversation this morning.
Well, I do too, Vic, and maybe next time we can discuss narcissistic personality disorder. That is an emotional disorder that has exploded in our day of social media because people feel so courageous behind their computer, anonymous, typing on their keyboard keys, saying some of the most outrageous things and seemingly getting away with it. It's a real problem in our culture today. It affects our politics. It affects our businesses. It affects a lot of individuals. So maybe we can talk about that next time, if it's okay with you.
Oh, absolutely. I would absolutely love to talk about that subject. I actually have watched many YouTube videos on NPD. Some of them are so true. Chris Reese, I don't know if you know, she's a woman counselor. She just has some tremendous NPD things that she brings out situations so well. So yeah, I would love that as a next topic.
Great. Well, look forward to it.
Okay. Well, thank you, Greg. I've always enjoyed talking to you. You're just a great person, and I learned so much from you. I consider you a mentor. Thank you for joining us today. Please share this podcast and tell your friends about it. We can be found on a variety of platforms, including Spotify, YouTube, Podbean, and most other places where you get your podcasts. You can easily find us on any browser by simply typing in the KUBIK Report. You can reach me by email at vic@kubik.org. vic@kubik.org. Have a great day.